Welcome to the Marconi Project, an oral history series of the Italian American Museum of Washington, D.C. In these interviews, we capture the memories and experiences of Italian immigrants and Italian Americans in the nation's capital. We are ready to hear your story.
Good afternoon. Today is November 24th, 2024. We have with us today a husband and wife couple, Gianni and Patricia Brizzi. They have been in the Washington area for many years. Patricia spent a good part of her time with Casa Italiana, Italian language school. She worked closely with Father Cesare, who was the first Scalabrini priest to lead this parish after it was taken over by the group, and stayed at this parish for 20 years. As we will learn from Patricia, he was most instrumental in bringing the church to where it is today. Gianni, our husband, brings a different perspective that we have had so far in these interviews. He came to Washington as an international civil servant working for the World Bank. He has had a broad experience than most of people we interview in this program of oral history. So let's begin our interview by asking you, where are you from Italy, and where did you live in Italy? Are you from wherever you are, or you immigrated within Italy to where you are? Because this is about immigration, and sometimes there's a lot of immigration within Italy. Okay.
I consider myself from Milano, although I was born in Somma Lombardo, a small village at that time, not far from Malpensa Airport, now part of the greater metropolitan area. My father's family is originally from Lecco and Sondrio, northern part of Lombardy. He was born in Milano, where he became a doctor and specialized in cardiology. My mother, Annie, was born in Paris from parents from Verona. My grandfather, very young, decided to attend the École Polytechnique of Paris, where my mother was born. Though my parents always lived in Milano, I was born in Somma Lombardo because they evacuated there during World War II because of the harsh life in Milano and bombing which was occurring in their city. I had a lot of friends, mainly farmers' children. We were playing together in the fields, swimming in irrigation canals, enjoying looking at cows being milked. I still remember the pleasure and the pleasant smell of the fresh milk, the joy of collecting fresh eggs and making wildlife flowers crowns to place in our heads. When it was time for me to attend elementary school, my parents moved back to Milano, which I remember as one of the main changes in my life. At that time, Milano was a quieter and much safer city. So myself and my two sisters were able to play with other children living nearby in the neighborhood on the sidewalks in front of the residential building.
Okay. Now, Gianni, do you want to tell us about your background?
Yes, I was born in Milano. Three of my grandparents are from old families from Milan and the surroundings. My grandfather, on the contrary, was from Verona. He came to Milano as a youngster, and he started working in a very large garment and linen shops, just few steps from Piazza del Duomo, the Cathedral Square. And the shop was owned the father of my grandmother. My grandfather was a smart man, and very little later, he married the daughter of the owner. So he integrated completely in the Milanese society. Now, concerning the question of the special memories that I had when I was a young fellow that you made to Patricia. I also have a similar memories because during the war, to find safety and also food, we evacuated from Milan and moved to Cernusco sul Naviglio, which is in the suburbs of Milan, where my grandparents had a large villa and also were landowners. And I remember very vividly the time that I spent there, playing with the children of the farmers who were attending the life of my grandparents, the land of my grandparents, swimming with them in the cold water of the irrigation canals, hiding in the cornfields together. So I have similar memories of the one of Patricia.
Could you tell us about your schooling? Where did you go to school?
I always studied in public schools, with the exception of the last 2 years of high school, which I carried out with going to the Orsolini Sisters School. Then I attended the Faculty of Architecture in the Polytechnic of Milano, and where I met my future husband. I will never forget how we met. That is very funny. It was a very nice day in May. I still remember it was a warmer day. And I was sitting outside the Faculty of Architecture where I was studying. And when I saw Gianni crossing the road, and it's incredible, but I immediately thought, this is the man I'm going to marry. Okay. Now, do you want to talk about this?
Well, tell us what was your reaction?
Okay. Let me say that I studied with the nuns when I was in the elementary schools. And then I moved for junior high and high school to Leone XIII, which is a school run by the Jesuits in Milan. So, and later on, at the completion of my high school, I started studying at the Polytechnic of Milan, and I graduated in architecture. And indeed, Patricia was correct in saying that also for me was somehow a surprise to see her, and was love at first sight. But there is a little difference. That I had seen her previously coming out of the house of a friend. She didn't notice me because I was with other fellow friends moving into the house, but I noticed her and I was very attracted by her. So when I crossed the road and I saw her sitting in front of the Faculty of Architecture, I immediately went over her. And I had the excuse to engage in a conversation by asking her, "Are you the girl that I have seen in the house of my friend?" So the story that facilitated our. We had a very long conversation, and as a result of this conversation, I invited her to come with me to buy a couple of tennis shoes that I had to buy, and she accepted to come. Now, these tennis shoes are very old, Superga tennis shoes. They are very old, are all yellow, but are still in my wardrobe. Wow. And I will never dump them, and I let my children the responsibility to dump them after my death.
That's quite a story. That's quite a story. That's a love story, all right? Tell us a little bit, what made you come to the United States?
I assume the responsibility for the coming of the Brizzi family in the United States because I was offered a job at the World Bank, and at that time the World Bank was a really prestigious institution.
You want to talk about your children?
We have 2 kids. They both were born in Rome, in Italy, because at that time I was working in Rome. And they came to the United States very young, because my daughter was 5 years old and my son was only 1 year old. They basically studied in the United States. Their maternal language is certainly English. In fact, they are speaking to each other in English, even now, many years after. And what happened is that Patricia was spending vacation in Italy every summer. And my daughter got fascinated with Italy. And when she completed high school, she decided to go to university in Italy. So she studied law at the Catholic University in Milan and never came back to the United States. My son, on the contrary, is very American. He studied at the Virginia Tech. He's also a patriot because he has been a member of the National Guard of Virginia, and he served both in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So he's a veteran. He had a nice career in consulting firms, and then since he was working in government consulting, he was drawn into government, and now he has major responsibility in the General Service Administration, GSA. He's running in Texas the office which is managing all the U.S. properties, federal properties in 5 states: Texas, New Mexico, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. And he has a very large staff, about 600 people.
Oh, by the way, I want to point out that we already always spoke Italian with our kids, and so they grew up speaking Italian to us, although among themselves they speak English. I remember also when I was coordinator here at the language school, I always suggested to parents of young children to speak their own language to their children. It's very important to grow up with the same culture and the same language as your parents, or one parent even.
You know, that is a very good approach. We know a couple whose husband works at the IMF. She's from Africa, from Africa, the French part of Africa. He's Italian. So they have 3 children, and the mother speaks French to the children, the father speaks Italian to the children, and these kids speak English to themselves. So they are now not even 10 years old, they're fluent in 3 languages.
That's very good.
This ability at that age to absorb languages like a sponge, unbelievable.
What I always suggest.
That's a very good suggestion.
Yeah.
You want to teach your kids to learn your original language. Talk to them.
The language is not only the language; it's the culture.
Oh, of course.
It's much more than only the language.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you said you have your daughter in Italy. One question I have is, what is your current relationship with Italy?
Okay, I would say that I always had a close contact with Italy, and I always spent a long summer vacation there. Gianni will join me and the children for more limited period of time, according to his work commitment. After his retirement, we spend 4 or 5 months in Italy every year. Part of the time we are in Milano, where my daughter lives, where we have a small apartment in the very center of the city, which we love. And then a part in Sori, which is a small apartment that we have in Italian Riviera on the beach, near the beach. And this is our summer vacation generally there.
Where is it? Where in?
It's between about 20 kilometers from Genova toward Portofino, I would say.
That area,
Yeah,
we've been there.
The Italian Riviera.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yes, I always say that my relation with Italy is a complex one in the sense that I am binational. I am both American and Italian. Okay. And I became American much later than Patricia, because when I was working at the World Bank, I was working with a diplomatic visa in the United States, a famous G4, exactly. And then when I retired, the State Department offers the opportunity to people who have been living for more than 15 years in the United States, working in international organizations, to apply for residency. You know? And finally, at the beginning, I thought that it would have been interesting to go back to Italy, but then I changed idea, and I applied for residency in the United States. I was very happy to be a resident of the United States, but I ran into problems because 1 year I stayed more than 6 months outside the United States. And when I came back to Washington, I was picked up from the line, and an official told me, oh, you have to go back because you are not allowed to, you didn't ask for the permit and you are not allowed to do so, etc., etc. Then I implored pity to this official, and she told me, look, now I give you a warning, but don't repeat the same experience. So I spoke with a legal advisor, and this lady told me, look, if you want to avoid this kind of problems, better you become an American citizen. You qualify for it, you can become an American citizen any moment. Do it if you want to avoid troubles and difficulties, which I did with limited conviction, to be frank with you. Yet, the day that I was in that large room with any immigrants, and I had to say the Pledge of Allegiance, I had a couple of tears going down my cheeks.
I can still feel it.
I can still feel it.
Yeah. Well, we all went through that experience. By the way, that's a very good story to record, because the G4 holders who used to work at these international institutions automatically were given that right. I think that right is now not so automatic anymore. So anyway, that's a very interesting story. Do we want to go now talk about Patricia's relationship with the Holy Rosary Church, but more particularly with Casa Italiana language school?
Exactly. Okay. I was already teaching Italian in some private schools here in Washington when a friend of mine, Professor Liliana Lanzano, who became an institution here in Casa Italiana. She was teaching until she died a couple of years ago. And she called me that they needed a new teachers for Italian for the school was just opened at Casa Italiana, a language of Italian language. Excuse me. Anyway, after a while, Father Cesare, that I met, realized that he could not manage running the church and Casa Italiana at the same time by himself. As a result, he called me and asked me to become a coordinator of the school while he always remained the formal director. The school needed a lot of planning and organization. There was not existent practically. So I started from scratch, hiring teachers, choosing textbook, preparing programs, brochure, and everything the school needed. I want to talk about Father Cesare now.
Tell us a little bit about Father Cesare, because you were the first person who could talk about Father Cesare in all these interviews that we've done. Go ahead.
Okay, I feel very attached to him. I was very impressed by him and his foresight for Casa Italiana, the School of Italian language, and the future of the church, and the desire to create a social and cultural center. I always thought that Father Cesare would not become a successful priest, Scalabrinian priest. He would have been a very interesting, successful entrepreneur. He was a man of action. He didn't like small talks. It was always concrete and to the point. He always thought that the survival of the church as a parish was linked to the culture, social, and educational activity aimed at the entire Italian community in Washington, rather than the Italian community that lived in the neighborhood and founded the church, but didn't exist anymore. I like to remember him as a very paternal figure. He was a kind and down-to-earth man. During a lunch together, he explained to me that why he became a priest. He was living in a small village surrounded by mountains with his big family. His family was very poor, but he wanted to remind me that always they had food on the table. At the end of the elementary school, his mother asked him if he wanted to continue studying or to work as a farmer with his father. Father Cesare told me that he looked at the surrounding mountains surrounding his village, and always he wanted to see what existed behind them. The only way to continue studying was to enter in a seminary. So he became a Scalabrinian priest, and he recalled vividly when almost crying. I remember almost with tears in his eyes when he told me when he had to say goodbye to his mother before coming to the United States as Scalabrinian father.
He went to the seminary in Italy, right? He came to the United States after he was ordained priest.
Exactly.
By the way, this is Father Cesare Donizan, Donenzan, which is a Venetian kind of name. It's not your typical Italian.
Was from Veneto, yes.
From Veneto, he was from Veneto. No, I just want to be sure that we know Father Cesare Donenzan. Donenzan.
Yes.
Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit more? You said he was very entrepreneurial. Yes, he was very businesslike, and he didn't like small talk. I agree. But you can continue. Tell us.
Okay. When he decided to create Classe Italiana, he decided also to have a classes in Italian language for adults and children, mainly for the people, for the immigrants people, and so in order for the children to learn their Italian origin and culture also, not only the language. He started having talks with the Italian embassy in Washington and then with the government officials in Rome. He became a good friend with Mr. Giulio Andreotti, a famous post-war Italian politician who served also as Italian Prime Minister. The roots of his friendship rest on the fact that Mr. Andreotti was attending Mass at Holy Rosary Church whenever in Washington. The friendship was also useful to mobilize financial support from the Italian government and the church, to the church and Casa Italiana in particular. Under solicitation from Father Cesare, Mr. Andreotti assured a big contribution for development of Italian classes for children. Besides coordinating the teaching activity, I promoted many other activities, like inviting important speakers to make presentation to specific aspects of social and cultural life in Italy. At the end of every school year, Casa Italiana would invite all the students to a nice dinner party at the Italian embassy. I was able to organize with the help of gifted teachers and students alike to learn the Italian language through music. As a school coordinator, my office was always open to students to solve problems, such as finding classes or helping them to plan trips to Italy. At the time there was an internet, and often I helped students to write letters to Italy. I remember that a lot of time I had to help some of the young ladies to write letters to the boyfriend they met in Italy. And I had, and just later on to find out that most of the time they were already married. That was very common. I left Casa Italiana when my husband went to Yemen to manage the local World Bank country office, and I followed him in that beautiful and unique country. I'm now still part of many organizations in Italy.
Tell me a little bit more about Father Cesare. How was he? How long he was here? He was here a long time, wasn't he?
I don't know, because when I met him, okay, let me tell you also, we came to Washington, I didn't know anything about Casa Italiana or Holy Rosary. At that time, Casa Italiana didn't exist, not even at Holy Rosary. Gianni and I particularly were not very attending a lot of masses, so I didn't know anything. I just find out about, as I told you before, about Father Cesare looking for Italian teachers through my friend Liliana Lanzano, and that is what I met Father Cesare. I didn't met him before. I know that I've been here for many years, but I remember very, very well the day he had to leave.
Okay, well, that's what I want to get to. I read a lot about Father Cesare, and I think he was here for about 20 years. I think this was his first parish that he managed, and was very attached to this parish. He did a lot to increase, to make it what it is today. And he was here for 20 years. Did you know, were you here when he left?
Fortunately, yes.
Okay, you were here. The reason I'm asking is that there's a lot of talk going around that he really didn't want to go, that he tried very hard to stay. And his departure left him quite bitter and maybe contributed to his early death, because he died shortly after he left. What can you share with us that he told you about his departure and his unhappiness? Do you know what?
Okay, let me tell you. First of all, he was a very good priest. And so since the Calabrian fathers decided you have to leave Washington to Bay, and he, officially didn't say anything. Privately, obviously, he was very, very sad about this decision. He didn't want to leave. I tried as much as possible, and a lot of parishioners, they wrote to the Scalabrini fathers in order to keep him here. I really have no idea why he decided to move him, and actually I remember talking to his superiors personally, and they told me that was the practice of the Scalabrinian fathers to be moved around United States as much as possible. And he had been here more longer than normal people. Yes. No, he was very, very sad, to the point that as soon as, but I remember him talking to me about what I should have done to continue his job, my job and his job in the Casa Italiana Italian school, to the point that almost every day after he left, he would call me on the phone, and also asking me how the new priest at that time that replaced him, he was doing here. Unfortunately, obviously, the new priest was not Father Cesare. I had personally such a good relationship with him. Was very difficult to work with the new priest, obviously. But I remember that the first the real Father Cesare was really very worried about the future of Casa Italiana without him, yes. And I think I agree with you. I think that his early death after leaving was part because he really felt leaving Casa Italiana something very, very difficult for him.
The reason I asked, it wasn't a sudden death. He wasn't sick, so maybe he died of a broken heart. Something suddenly happened that took him away, because nobody could give an explanation what happened. So there were all kinds of theories, but it's not worth speculating. No. But clearly he was not happy, and that probably his departure contributed to his early death.
I agree, absolutely. I remember for me as being terrible when after his death. It was like losing a real father for me, yes. Yeah. And I remember when he was here, the funeral was held here in Casa Italiana, and I remember spending hours in the church with his coffin there, praying for him, yes.
Yeah. Tell me, Patricia, you want to tell us a little bit more about your involvement with the Italian community other than the church?
Okay, first of all, when I came to Washington, it was very, very important for me to find, I told you before I didn't speak any English, and so it was very important, and with two small children and my husband traveling a lot, to get in touch with some Italian friends and so on. And so I was able to meet ladies pretty much my age, with whom I'm still a very good friend, are like my sisters in the United States, to find support and help and so on and on. That was very, very difficult at the beginning for me here, yes. But at that time was not any organization. The only, the Diva was born much later on, at the beginning of the 2000, I guess, and I became a member of Diva organization. And I part, with Italian, also with Italian Cultural Society, not so many other organizations, because, the group of my friend was more than enough for me.
When you were here with Father Cesare, I guess the church at that time was different than it is today. There was a lot of activity, wasn't there? A lot more. It was more of a gathering. The people celebrated la festa di questa, la festa di quella.
Okay, I didn't attend so many of those gatherings, but I remember, for example, they had always at the end of the year, the New Year's Eve ball or others gathering. Yes, I remember. And some dinner, for example, there was polenta dinner. I don't remember. Yes, I do. They were very active at Casa Italiana. Yes.
Tell me a little bit about Father Cesare and his relationship with the constituency of the church. I got the impression that Father Cesare, being from Veneto, he considered one group of parishioners coming from one part of Italy, one group of parishioners coming from the southern part of Italy, and that some people thought that he, being a Veneto, he managed to let it be known that he had different views of different groups. You get that impression that he was. Father Cesare, as you indicated, that's true. He was no small talk. He was really a businessman, and he was very good at it. And maybe this impression that some people have, that I've heard, is because he was not for small talk. He was really all business, and not everybody was in that mindset. You went to the University of Milan, and some of these people didn't. So they had a different reaction to his modus operandi, if you will.
Well, I don't think that he has any kind of feeling. Although I have to say, also we created a group that to run Casa Italiana, like I don't remember the name, but anyway, that we meeting with other people that we were running. And those people were obviously mostly from northern Italy. I have to say that obviously at that time, most of the people coming to Casa Italiana were immigrants. Most of them, they were speaking dialect. They didn't go to school. And so maybe, I didn't have this feeling, but maybe I agree with Father Cesare. It was very more difficult to have a relationship and to work with those people than the white, say, real Italian that grew up in Italy and studied in Italy.
I think what you just said makes a lot of sense, because that you have to adapt to the different type of individual you're dealing with, and maybe that was misinterpreted as having favorites. But it's a question of It's how do you relate to different people? You have to sort of adapt. You know, I'll tell you this a little joke very quickly. There was one of the priests who came after Father Cesare. He told us a story. I don't know whether it's true, but apparently he was in Canada, and he was in confessional, and there's one old lady from Calabria came to confess, and she spoke the local dialect, and he was from Veneto, and he could not understand what she was saying. She was frustrated, and so at the end he said, okay, go out, say Hail Mary 3 times. And so apparently when he came out, she was a little bit frustrated. She goes up to him, and this is the story he told me. He says, Padre, qua parlam e non ci capim. parliamo, non ci capiamo. Così un pochettino when you deal with.
Let me add something. It's very true that maybe the society today is different. But I remember when I came here during the 70s, a lot of people, they were children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, and never been back to Italy. And so they were asking me, for example, it's true that in Italy now you have electricity, you have running water in your houses. Obviously, I was from Milano, from a completely different background, but there were 2 different kind of people, I have to say, yes.
We have in this interview, because we've heard other stories, and you know that there are different immigrants, there are different people. You're not your typical immigrant. You.
Immigration which takes place now in the United States. This is part of the conversation. From Italy, it's very different from the immigration which took place a century ago. At that time, people were really poor, like the starving Irish or the Germans after the famine. So they immigrated because of lack of opportunity in their countries. Now, the immigration to the United States is made of people with sophisticated university degrees. Often they come and they are researchers at the NIH or work in high-tech complexes and consulting firms. Is a immigration which is basically based on the fact that these people have greater opportunities in the other countries, including the United States, than their countries, but is an educated type of population. It's completely different, you know.
In those years, the immigrants brought physical labor mainly, mainly physical labor. Now the United States as the beneficiary of the brain drain leaving Italy. Okay, let's now turn to Gianni and talk a little bit about his experience. What did you do before you came to the World Bank? I think you mentioned you were in Rome. You could tell us a little bit before you came here, and then how you came to the World Bank.
As I was saying before, I graduated in architecture. But in fact, I was never interested in the work in being an architect. And in fact, during my university studies, I specialized in urban planning and urban economics. And in fact, immediately after completing the university, I spent a period of time in the UK working on the new town development, which was quite common at that time after World War II and in the 70s. When I completed my military service, I started looking for job opportunities. And I had a number of offers. There were good times in Italy at that time. You know? There were plenty of jobs and consequent miracolo economico, and in particular in Milan, there were many opportunities. One of the jobs that I was offered to me by Mr. Berlusconi, the most significant political. Berlusconi was in touch with a very good friend of my uncle, and this friend of my uncle, whom I knew very well, spoke about me with Berlusconi, telling, well, there is this young architect who specializes in urban planning. He has worked on the expanding towns and the new towns in the UK, and Berlusconi said, send him to me. And in fact, I visited Berlusconi in Corso Magenta in Milan. He was only a few years older than me, maybe 4 or 5 years older than me, but already and he, at that time, was planning to develop Milano 2, a satellite city around Milan. So after 1 hour of conversation, he offered me to join his company and to get involved in the development of Milano 2. But I had also another job offer by a consulting firm which was called SOMEA, Società per la Matematica e l'Economia Applicata, Company for the Mathematics and Economic Applied. And they were offering me the opportunity of going to Paris for 1 year and a half to do training on the economic and financial evaluation of investment programs. So I decided that that was an incredible opportunity also of deepening my knowledge about investment analysis. And I accepted the job. In fact, I went to Paris. I got married with Patricia because I had a job. Then I came back. While I was in Paris, the company moved headquarters from Milan to Rome because one of the major shareholders of Somea was IMI, Istituto Mobiliare Italiano, and consequently they wanted us to be in Rome. So I moved in Rome, and I spent about 7 years working in Somea on many different investment projects, including also in the tourism sector. It was a very interesting experience. I committed myself to work very intensively, and even I made a career there because after 4 years I was promoted division chief of the Urban Economic Development Division of Somea, a position that I held until I left Somea to join the World Bank.
What year did you join the World Bank?
I joined in 1974, in fact, at the end of 1974. Just this month will be the 50th anniversary of my arrival in Washington. Wow. 50 years ago. I still remember vividly what happened at that time. You know.
They recruited you. How did you get the job? Were you?
This one is a fun story. I have to tell it, even if it takes a few minutes. When I was working at Somea, I told you I was very active also in investment project in the tourism sector. At a certain point, IMI organized a conference and invited me to talk about what were the changes in the tourism industry which were forthcoming, also due to the introduction of the jumbo jet in air transportation. So I went to this conference, I made my presentation. At the end of the presentation, there was a small reception. A gentleman came close to me and introduced him to me. I am Gianni Fresco. I am the owner of a consulting firm, which is called Tour Consult. I like very much your presentation, and we exchanged business cards. You know, you exchange business cards in your life with hundreds of people who will never see and you don't expect to see anymore in your life. It is a matter of fact that 2 weeks later, I was flying from Rome to Geneva, and incredible, sitting next to me there was Gianni Fresco. It's really the destiny, you know.
Destiny. Sometimes it's destiny.
So
yes.
we started talking together, and then he was going to Geneva, staying there for a number of days. I was going to Geneva for a work assignment to make the evaluation of an investment for the construction of a clinic in the Geneva area by Italian investors. And we had several times dinner together. The last day before I was leaving, he told me, I got an interesting contract, which is the development of the tourism plan for the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I told him, I will come free to participate, to work on this study. He didn't say anything. The conversation ended there. Then I went back to Rome. 2 weeks later, a messenger comes to my office. He had an envelope and an open ticket, round-trip ticket, Rome, Rio de Janeiro, with a little note. I took your word. It was summertime. Brazil was winter time. With the excuse of an early vacation, a long vacation, I went to Brazil. Patricia was not so happy because I was abandoning her alone during vacation. So I went to Rio de Janeiro. I spent 1 month there working on this study. And I was responsible for the preparation of the chapter or the section on the economic returns of tourist development in the state, looking mainly at employment generation, foreign exchange earnings from international tourism, and so on. That study was funded by the World Bank. So the manager who was responsible for the financing asked Giovanni Fresco, who wrote that chapter? And said, a guy who is Gianni Brizzi. He told him, I said, a few months later, Giovanni called me, and there is the division chief of the World Bank, which was involved with that study, who is passing by Rome and wants to talk to you. So I met him at the Hasler Villa Medici. He was having a stopover there on the way to Tunisia, where the World Bank was funding a project. We had a conversation of 1 hour, and that is the way I ended up in the World Bank.
Fascinating story. But that's because you had something special. Because at that time, in the 60s, there was a lot of investment going on, and this idea of cost-benefit analysis was really important. That's what you were doing. Well, how was it working at the World Bank? Did you like it? Clearly you were recruited. You didn't even apply.
I have to tell you that at that time, working for the World Bank was a very special. We were traveling first class around the world, staying in any hotel we wanted to stay, including the most expensive hotel like the Peninsula in Hong Kong or something like that. No. And we had an incredible treatment. For example, every summer, the bank will pay for the staff and the entire family's vacation in the country of origins, etc.
Home leave.
We were part of the limited jet setters who were traveling around the world with great... and the job was fascinating. Definitely, I had a long career at the World Bank, 30 years of work. And initially, I was an investment officer. I did work in many separate, different fields. Initially, tourism, because what was brought me to the World Bank. Then I moved into urban investment, transportation. For a while, I was also in a division which was dealing with financial intermediation. We were making loans to local banks in developing countries which will on-lend our resources for small industrial investment projects in industrial activities, etc. And I was supervising the on-lending activities of these banks. I work in many different countries of the world, both in West Africa, North Africa, in the Middle East, Latin America, I work on India, etc. And gradually I made my way onto management. Initially as a coordinator for the lending operation of the World Bank in the Middle East. Then I got into senior management and my position became coordinator of the all lending operation in the Middle East and North Africa.
Were there a lot of Italians at the World Bank at the time?
Not really. We were about 25. Only one was part of management at that time. Very small community of Italians, yeah.
Oh. Who was the president when you went to the World Bank? McNamara had left by then.
No. I joined with McNamara.
He was still there.
He was still there. And every time there was a lending operation, before presenting it to the board of directors, we called for a meeting in his office. And I remember that once I went to one of these meetings in his office for a lending operation on which I had worked, and it was quite an experience. It was amazing. This man was really a very charismatic and incredible personality, very direct talking, etc. So I had the opportunity of meeting Mr. McNamara in person.
Apparently he had a computer for a brain.
Absolutely.
Before we had a computer.
Absolutely.
He was, well, you know, he did a lot of good and a lot not so good. I think his experience in Vietnam haunted him afterwards. In fact, I saw this movie called The Fog of War. The Fog of War.
Right.
He did a mea culpa in that movie. It was a very interesting movie.
And basically, he recovered from these sins by serving as president of the World Bank.
Quite a character. I used to see him walk around DuPont Circle with sneakers, walking around, and it was quite a guy.
Great man.
You told me about how good the World Bank was when you joined. Did it change while you were there? Because the World Bank today is not the World Bank you just described. In terms of travel and benefits, it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah. But before coming to these material changes, basically the staff now has a completely different treatment, both in terms of compensation, retirement, and also travel regulation. It's very important to see the evolution of the World Bank throughout history, from its foundation in 1946 with the agreement of Bretton Woods, with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. At that time, the IMF and the World Bank had the responsibility of providing financial stability and development funding, basically for the reconstruction of the European countries after World War II. At that time, the European countries didn't have access to the international financial market. Consequently, the World Bank was providing most needed funding for investment projects which will contribute to the economic development. Within the passing of years, the European countries became economically viable and could have access directly to the financial market by issuing bonds and selling them to private and public institutions. Those periods coincided with the decolonization. So a lot of former colonial countries were becoming independent. And these countries didn't have access to the financial market. So the World Bank reconverted itself from an institution which was working for the reconstruction of Europe to an institution which was helping economic development in developing countries. And in 1974, when I joined the World Bank, that process was very much at the beginning and taking off and becoming structured. Was also the time in which we had the Cold War, where the world divided into two blocks, the Western Bloc and the bloc inspired by communism and attracted by the Soviet Union. And the World Bank was definitely an instrument at the service of the Western Bloc. So I was working in a very ideological environment from the economic point of view, at the service of the promotion of Western values and economic policies in the world. All of this collapsed in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the economic globalization. Also, the World Bank became a completely different institution. We had Russia and China becoming member of the World Bank, and we had the economic globalization. Okay? Now, the economic globalization is the theme on which I worked until my retirement. And I was a strong believer in the economic globalization. All of this is changing now. The rivalry between the United States, let's be frank, the United States and China for the economic primacy in the world is bringing gradually to what I call the economic decoupling. We are trying to impede commerce with China or to limit it, etc., etc. So the entire world is changing, and we are living very uncertain times. We have to see what will happen in the coming years. And all of this has a reflection on the World Bank. I am asking myself, what is the future of the World Bank? The globalized institution which faces most probably a trauma because of the deglobalization process.
Yeah, that's very good. I'll make 2 points. What you just said, that's very interesting for the record. Now we refer to the World Bank, but the original name is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. So the bank has managed to redefine itself in different ways. It's no longer the sort of reconstruction. They do a lot more policy work. They don't just do it. They do a lot more. They do a lot of more research in finding new ways of doing things. So it's changed. Now, with respect to the decoupling from China, the World Bank now in Asia has got competition from China's own World Bank. They have their own, whatever it's called, the Reconstruction Bank, which is now, they're trying to attract Asia to that bank, which I think it's in Beijing or somewhere in China. And some of the members of the World Bank, leading Great Britain, I think was the first Western country to join. I don't think the U.S. is a member of that bank yet. I don't think so. But so I can tell you that the World Bank will find a way to continue to operate. I would say they will find some way to survive. There was a conference last week or a couple of weeks ago in Washington about the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Institution. And I ran into a former minister, Gianni was minister. Oh, yeah. He was here. He gave me a copy of his book, and it was very interesting. It shows that a lot of people are thinking about where we go from here. Well, we are close to exactly 1 hour, and this has been a fascinating interview, and it will add significantly to our oral history project, and hopefully it will be something that future historians will go back and listen and learn something from what you have brought to this discussion. I think with that we could end the discussion, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Gianni, and you, Patricia, for agreeing to do this. It's been fascinating. I want to thank Giovanni, and then we can end here. And then that's it.